Good afternoon, Radford fans, and welcome to another edition of Sports Talk with Rags here in Season 4, Episode 15. And today, here we are honored to have Radford alum Mike Ashley with us. Mike, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mark. You got that official radio voice on now. It made me laugh.
Well,
Good for you, man. You're pretty
thanks.
good at this stuff.
Appreciate that. And some people have told me that I do a good job, and I have a radio voice. So maybe one day somebody will give me a crack. You know.
There aren't any jobs left in that industry either, just like mine in journalism. So yeah, sorry about that. We're here too late to the party.
Right. Well, hey, let's start at the beginning here when you were growing up and your interest in sports, or what started your journalism career.
Oh, I'm a classic late bloomer. I didn't really pay much attention to sports till I was about 11 years old. I grew up in a single parent home. My mom raised me, and I think did a great job. But she didn't really turn on the sports for me there, and it wasn't until 1971 I think I traded in the comics for Sports Illustrated, and
Okay.
started reading that religiously. And there, speaking of things that are no longer what they once were, Sports Illustrated, man, that was always my goal to write for Sports Illustrated, but it just didn't work out. But I read everything I could, and again, I think a lot of it for me was the comic book background. I was looking for heroes, I guess, and then I found them in sports, and I tried to play sports myself, but I wasn't so great. Cut from the freshman basketball team at Andrew Lewis High School, and went on to a all-star. I was all church league
Okay.
for years, and of course, I was the only one thinking about all church league.
Right. Yeah.
I was one of the last in slow pitch softball. I was one of the last great good field no hit players in that
Right.
sport too.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's funny now. I'm associated with Radford University baseball, and I do throw a pretty mean knuckleball, or I used to. Yeah, that was just I've been Forrest Gump, man. I've been a feather on the wind, and it's just I'm one of the luckiest guys you will ever meet. So yeah, it's just got into sports. If you want to know the truth, the big break for me was Joe Davis, a basketball coach who at one time had the most wins in Radford University history, and allowed Radford to get to Division One. He was such a good coach. We were overmatched, but we won more than our fair share of games under Joe. And he of course coached at Glenver High School in 1975. They had this miracle team that won the 2A state championship. Miracle shot at the buzzer. At Andrew Lewis, we had four guys in the starting lineup that went on to play college basketball, and had no business losing to guys. And a guy named Garland Jefferson also was at Covington then, who went on a full ride to UVA,
Wow.
and yet Glenver
Right.
wins the state championship. So Coach Davis parlayed that into a job at Ferrum, where he won 20 plus games for 2 straight years, and then magically. And I've never got the chance to ask Joe this straight up. He came back to Salem.
Yeah.
Andrew Lewis merged with Glenver. Arch rivals
Right.
became at the same school, merged at the new Salem High School, which, by the way, Salem started their own school system later on just so they could hire the football coaches they wanted. That's how big a deal sports is in Salem, Virginia.
Right.
And but coach, the team didn't mesh. We had two varsity teams joining, and it wasn't any acrimony between the kids. We all had a great time that first year at Salem High School. We all tripped on those carpets together for our 1 year at Salem as a senior coming in, and but our team wasn't very good. And I was editor of the paper. I already was interested in writing, and thank heavens for the teachers who championed that back when I was younger. And I was pretty good for that age, and I was editor of the paper, and we merged with Glenver, and so they brought in a whole bunch of people. And there was another guy that ended up being sports editor. Well, I ended up firing him because he never got his copy in on time. Mostly was my excuse, but actually I wanted to be sports editor too.
Right. Yeah.
So I covered Joe Davis's basketball team. He liked the way I handled it, sort of the kid gloves. I posted I wrote the truth, but I wasn't out to hurt anybody. That's not what I was about as a writer ever in my career. And I went to community college, Virginia Western, UCLA, University of Colonial Avenue,
Right.
VWCC. I was there
Right.
2 years. I got A's on 13 straight English papers. So I said, hey, maybe I should stick with this writing thing.
Right.
Meanwhile, Joe Davis is sending me information like he's recruiting me as a basketball player. So I land in Radford. The first day I walk into the office there at the student newspaper, they knew my name and they said, can you write a column? And I went, I under my breath, I was like, can I write a column? I've been waiting my whole life to do this. Are you
Right.
kidding me?
Right.
So sports columnist for 3 years, sports editor for 2 years. That's how the baseball thing got going. I wrote a column about how so many guys were there to play baseball. And I was like, I cover sports here, fellas. There isn't a baseball team. They're not talking about a baseball team. And yeah, this is the untold story. We added men's gymnastics where at Radford, where money is always, we just don't have that many male alumni yet to donate to sports,
Right.
especially at that point in our history. And we were recruiting men's gymnastics athletes from Chicago, New Orleans. And I was like, man, why are we spending this money? Why aren't we adding baseball if we need another men's sport? I wrote that column and ended up having a meeting. We had like almost 50 people show up. I was overwhelmed.
Right.
I ended up with a petition going in to see Dr. Dedman, the president at Radford at that time, who sports fans will remember from We Are Marshall. Let me tell you, David Strathairn is a great actor, but Dr. Dedman was nothing like that. He was no cowering weenie about anything. And so that was a pretty scary meeting for this kid. I go in my coat and tie, and I tell him, Dr. Dedman, we'd like to start baseball. And basically it boiled down to him saying, well, are you guys going to pay for it? And we went, yeah, it's going to be a club sport. So he said, sure, start your team. So we had a team, and then Radford moves to Division I. And as again, I know your clientele on this is very well educated in sports. How do you schedule if you're in new Division I? How do you get any home games? Well, the Big South Conference came about, and they wanted Radford to join, and we filled out a great home schedule, and then we're able to add other teams because Virginia is such a great basketball state, growing up here. And but we joined the Big South, and one of their codicils to that was, hey, you guys need to start varsity baseball. So we did, and now all these years later, I get all that credit.
Right. Yeah. Hey,
so thanks, fellas.
Right. Well, and then also I see that you spent, after graduating from Radford and working with Radford Athletics, I saw that, for 2 or 3 years, you moved cross town with covering Virginia Tech with covering their football.
Right. A good friend of mine got the job at a thing called the Hokie Huddler, which Bill Dooley, everybody remember Bill Dooley?
Yeah.
Bill Dooley started because he hated the Roanoke Times and the sports editor there, Bill Brill, so much. So he started his own newspaper, which was actually in-house at the athletic department and sort of under their sports information office, but not really.
Right.
And my guy didn't have as much experience in the business as I did, hadn't been a journalism major. So he was kind enough to just keep after me to take that job as the associate editor. And I finally did, because thinking long term, I said, hey, if I'm ever going to go forward in this business, I need the football experience. And I learned so much those 2 years of Virginia Tech in the mid 80s. First of all, I wish I studied up more before I took the job. The Roanoke Times, back when journalism was king in newspapers, the month I started there in the summer, started a 40-part series on the problems in Virginia Tech athletics. Which mostly centered around their football coach being their athletic director. I mean, Coach Dooley had football players on golf scholarships, soccer scholarships, just to have more personnel, and he was getting away with that, and until it got reported, and that was a tough time to work at Virginia Tech. I mean, Chris Colston, who was my partner, who went on to write for USA Today, and he's now an English teacher up here. Those lucky kids with all these great sports stories he's got. He and I would come to work every day not knowing whether or not the electricity would be shut off. And me, stupid me, who just wanted to be a sports writer, I've got to make this thing go by going out and selling ads. And
Right.
once the football team that first year started 0-3, nobody wanted to buy an ad. It was so terrible. We're eating lunch all over town trying to sell them $25 ads on the back of our magazine. And oh man, that's when I knew I wasn't cut out for sales. But let me tell you, as far as sports information goes, a business I knew nothing about when I got to Radford, and was lucky to run into Rick Rogers there, who became my mentor. Sports information. All I knew about it was at the end of football and basketball games, college games on TV. At the end, they were always thanking, and we'd like to thank sports information director Rick Brewer from North Carolina. And I didn't even know what they were talking about. So I got into that side of the business, discovered that was a chance to tell the stories of athletes in a positive manner. And obviously I'm a champion for Radford. I go to Virginia Tech. I got, oh man, it was like SID crisis seminar there, because we had Coach Dooley going to the Peach Bowl and being investigated by the NCAA, and he was suing his own school as we went down the stretch that season. We had an investigation into basketball. Charlie Moyer, because Mark Whitaker from your area, who was at the end of the bench, told some writer, hey, you should check Charlie Moyer's graduation rate for minority athletes. Well, yeah, Mark, it was terrible. But here's the thing. All those guys left school early to go play in Europe and made so much more money than they would have made even getting their degree. You know that. And then you had guys like Del Curry and Bobby Beecher who left at the end of their senior year and didn't necessarily get their degrees. I bet both of them have them by now. But we had that, and that year we went to the NCAA tournament. Dell's senior year, played Villanova in the first round in Baton Rouge. One of my great memories was being there for that regional, and I remember walking up behind Mark Price. Remember Mark Price at Georgia Tech? What a great player he was. Well, on TV, you're wondering, how big is he? So I just walked up behind him while he was being interviewed and sort of sized myself up to see how big Mark. He wasn't very big, Mark.
No,
it was impressive. And I tell you what, if Del Curry had the 3-point line, man, would he have put some 3-point records out of sight back then? I mean, you got to remember guys like him, and I remember another guy, Charlie Bradley, down at South Florida. Those guys just had that unbelievable range that, Del Curry's sons have made, just regular now. Hey, and I can say this because I am from the Roanoke area. I'm from Salem. And at Radford, we had Doug Day, who for a time set the national 3-point record, career makes, had it at Radford. But then there's also Curtis Staples, UVA, who was at who was from Patrick Henry in Roanoke, held the record, and also J.J. Reddick. I've always said that region must be the toughest in America to win a game of horse.
Yeah. Aren't the Barber twins from that area too?
Yes. Tiki and Rondé played at Cave Spring, the same high school that produced J.J. Reddick, and I actually covered them in high school. And the game I remember most, they were playing the powerhouse Pulaski County, which produced Gary Clark, Washington Redskins, James Madison. Chris Kinzer, who was the MVP of that Peach Bowl season, kicked that game winner against NC State in was that 86? Yeah. And Pulaski County was up there near Virginia Tech, up in the mountains, and came down in the Roanoke Valley to play Cave Spring, and they always had a chip on their shoulder. And I say this because that was Cave Spring was, Pulaski County was my favorite place to cover a game. The Booster Club there, you didn't need to eat before you went to the game because they just had the greatest stuff on sale outside the game. And the coach always took care of me, even though I was from Salem, the arch rival, as it turned out, eventually of Pulaski County. They always took such good care of me up there. And but they came down to Roanoke, and there were some calls that went against them. And suddenly, next thing I know, I'm there with, I love to cover from the sidelines. And I got my clipboard, and I'm standing there, and suddenly there's a fight breaking out. And now it's breaking out all over the field. And I'm standing there going, well, what do I do here? Do I help break up these fights, or do I take notes of what's going on? Do I get the hell out of the way because somebody's going to hurt me? It was a terrible thing. And I remember my editor at the Roanoke Times, I was stringing for them at that point, saw my notes on the fight and was like, well, did you find out who went to the hospital? I said, no, I had to watch the game. I didn't sign up for that. I signed up to cover football. I didn't sign up to get the medical report, like a MASH unit or something. If it was MASH, I would have bugged out because that was a scary moment. But anyway, Tiki and Rondé survived, and it was a lot of fun getting to see them play in high school.
Right. And before you left Virginia Tech and went back to Radford, I mean, Coach Beamer had come on, right?
Yeah, that was at the very end. The other point I need to make about my experience at Virginia Tech was I worked for 4 athletic directors in 2 years. 4. Bill Dooley and Dutch Bachman and 2 interims in there. And because Dutch left because he was so mad about the Charlie Moyer thing. The brain trust over in Burris Hall that runs Virginia Tech thought they would be smart and not go through athletics to run an investigation on Charlie Moyer, who is one of the nicest men in the world. I've always said that 25, 30-year nothingness of Virginia Tech basketball after they ran him out of town was the curse of Charlie Moyer for running off such a literal Virginia gentleman. And and Dutch ended up resigning. I remember he called the whole thing sheep dip a press conference and resigned. And so then they hired Dave Brain, who took over some of the groundwork Dutch had done, Dutch was a great leader. And so was Dave Brain, too, as a matter of fact. And things completely changed at Virginia Tech as they went on to join the Big East, and the football program took off under Beamer. And people forget, the first few years under Beamer weren't all that great. He made some staff changes at the behest of the administration, and then they joined the Big East, and they were off to the races. And what a great thrill it was to watch that from sort of up close there. But I was back at Radford, but I know when all the coaches would come over to Radford after home games to get away from all the Tech fans, they thought, and they'd run into people like me.
Well, yeah, because Virginia Tech basketball was Metro while the football was independent before they went to the Big East, right?
Yeah, that was a real problem. All those years of the ACC not letting Virginia Tech in, and people forget now the hat in hand Hokies, as I call them, aren't in the ACC back when if UVA doesn't take a stand for them. So I mean, I know, and now they enjoy beating UVA so much lately. The way those things will change though. Being kind of a neutral observer, just a fan of state programs in general. I can't have the Hokies way up here and the Cavaliers way down here. So, and it usually balances out in the long run. And it's better for both programs because if they're both successful, they push each other to greater heights. And I think we've seen that in evidence, I remember UVA being ranked number 1 in football in the 1990s. They were early on the year, Georgia Tech was so good. And then, that made Tech get after it and start, of course, Coach Dooley started recruiting down your way, Bruce Smith, guys like that. Of course, he got Lawrence Taylor at UNC, and just the pipeline they had from that so rich tradition area you guys have there.
Well, that's how I started following Virginia Tech football. The military brought my family to the Tidewater area, and when my brother graduated in '91, one of his high school friends went to Virginia Tech on a football scholarship. So I started following Virginia Tech football there in the fall of '91.
Yeah, what was your friend's name?
Jeff Holland.
Jeff Holland. That name sounds familiar to me.
Right.
I kept track of that. I used to keep a bottle of Malox at my desk over at Radford because I couldn't get a feature on our All-America soccer player, but they did something on the third string left tackle at Virginia Tech. But hey, I know how these things work. So yeah, it was still a great experience, and I do take a lot of pride in what Virginia Tech achieved down there in that. So yeah.
Yeah, and then going back to Radford, I mean, how was that? Your second time working there in Radford athletics and
right. I was at Tech 2 years, and then I went back to Radford. My job opened back up, and they promised me. Well, one of the reasons I left because I didn't have health benefits, and they promised me when I came back that it would happen. And my bosses were true to that promise. It did, and within a year, I was full because I was getting older. Those pickup basketball games were becoming more dangerous for me.
Right.
So I went back, but here's the thing, Mark. my experience at Virginia Tech, and so many people in media met me at Virginia Tech. They think I'm a Virginia Tech grad, and
Right.
that's okay.
Right.
But I'm a Radford guy, and the journalism program at Radford was so top notch when I came out of it, and second largest in the state, by the way, behind VCU.
Wow.
But when I came back, I would meet more writers, and you've met me. I like meeting people that like to talk sports, and so
Right. Right.
uh, I met so many writers and TV people and radio people in one football Saturday at Virginia Tech than I would run into in a year at Radford, because we didn't have football. We had
Right.
basketball. So when we played Richmond schools, I'd run into a lot of media. But now I came back in the old days before cell phones. A Rolodex was what
Right.
you kept on you. I came back with so many phone numbers, so many contacts. I was so much better at my job then. I could call anybody in the state about any athlete anywhere and get something in the media, and it just that made me really valuable for Radford. And that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. I'm a media file. I followed what was going on around the state journalism, coming out of school looking for a job when the Richmond Times-Dispatch sports staff didn't turn over at all for 7 straight years.
Wow.
And the only job that ever opened up at Roanoke at that time was the prep job, covering the high schools. And ultimately, I did do some of that. I covered high school football on Friday nights when I was at Virginia Tech, and I kept that job at Radford, which I was so worried about that being an NCAA violation, covering high school recruitable athletes. But the technicality for me was that I worked in the public relations office in sports information, not the athletic department. So I could interview a Ron Shelburne at Pulaski County who came to Radford, or Kelly Dampier, who these guys are Hall of Famers. Kelly Dampier was a football quarterback at Northside High School, running the wishbone, and played basketball, and then was a great baseball player. Little guy he was like Joe Morgan. He's such a
Wow.
hard hitter. Oh my gosh, he hit so many home runs. Great guy. And he was on the same team with your friend Denny Van Pelt, and that was a heck of a lineup. I joked in a speech I gave there that I had such long nights because we had so many great hitters and not so many great pitchers, and I was there all night keeping stats and
Right.
watching the game. Yeah, but it was a lot of fun. I wouldn't trade those memories for anything.
Yeah, and then moving to Fairfax, where you worked there for 25 years, and I know before we got together today, you said something about covering Maryland athletics.
Yeah. Again, feather in the wind. Very lucky. I was getting sort of long in the tooth at Radford in my late 30s, and I've been dating a long time, and uh, uh, a woman came back into my life who I'd known at Radford. She was actually the at the time was when we met as students, she was the advertising editor for the newspaper, and I was the sports editor.
Right.
And back in those days, before computers and all that, you put the paper together by hand, and I
Right.
was not very good at that. I
Right.
had my column in there every week with my picture in a box and a headline. I could write headlines and
Right.
cut lines for photos, but I could not lay them out very straight. And I put the lines around my column, and they were always crooked. And Kelly would come around doing the checking all the ads, because she had to answer to the advertisers, and she wanted to make sure everything was good. They won a lot of awards in her department, and um, we did too in sports, by the way. But
Right.
I couldn't lay out my column straight. She would fix the box around my column every week when we laid out the paper. And we got back together, and here we are, 26 years later, and she's still keeping me straight, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
it all worked out. And but I moved up here because obviously I thought it'd be easier for me to find a job up here in Northern Virginia than it would be for her to find one down there. And I was getting a 6-year-old daughter out of the deal, which was just a great experience to be able, again, lucky in life that waited that long to get married, and I did get a stepdaughter out of the deal, and I love her dearly. Kate's up in Brooklyn now, doing
Okay.
really well. And I was up here working, doing anything I could to turn a buck, and I kept, had a lot of contacts, and eventually that led to a guy calling me up and saying, "Hey, we're starting this website called ACC Today, and we don't have a Maryland writer." And so
Right.
I got on with them, and that guy that called me up, by the way, was Wes Durham.
Oh, wow.
who now everybody in the ACC knows pretty well. But Wes got his first full-time job at Radford, and we were roommates on the road. And yeah, in fact, you don't know this, but Wes has a pretty large derriere, and you can see I've got a pretty large stomach. And when we played basketball, if you remember, Mahorn and Rulin with the bullets back then were called Bump and Thump, and so when we played pickup in the Devon Center, we were called Butt and Gut.
Yeah,
Anyway, Wes got me that job.
nice.
We all thought we were going to make a ton of money on the internet back then, but in about 2 years, that job petered out. And I was lucky enough to hook up with people at Terrapin Times, where I worked for the next 24 years for Terrapin Times covering Maryland.
Okay. Yeah, and the thing is it's even though it's Maryland, I still don't see them as Big Ten for as long as they were
I
in
knew
the
this was going to
ACC.
come up. I knew this was going to come up. People up here don't understand how people down there feel about the Maryland thing, and I do because
Right.
I grew up down there.
Right.
You know, Lefty Drizel was a big deal in Martinsville, where he recruited regularly. Ended up getting Jeff Atkins out of there, and you know, he just very well connected. And you know, when we think of the glory days of the ACC, we all think of the '74 championship game. You know, Tom McMillan, Len Elmore, John Lucas, those guys playing against David Thompson, Tommy Burleson, and Monty Tao at NC State. By the way, I've shot with Monty Tao before a game, so
Cool.
mark that off my bucket list. Yeah.
Nice.
Anyway, I get it. I understand, but you got to understand, I was up here covering Maryland, and
Right.
Maryland, the school that produced Olympian Ronaldo Skeets Nehemiah, had to cut men's track because of their budget problems.
Oh,
And here comes the Big Ten going, well, we'll give you about $20 million more a year to join our league. So, you know, Maryland really didn't have any choice. They
right.
played it off as this big academic thing. But the truth is, and for those that don't know, here's a scoop. It was all about the money that Maryland had to have. And Maryland's still, you know, having some trouble. You know, they're the only school in the Big Ten now that doesn't have a you know, full-time practice facility. By the way, Virginia Tech's practice facility they've built a few years is amazing, but
Right.
it's small but amazing, and it's just what they needed. And Maryland has now got one on the drawing boards, and I think has broken ground on it. But you got to remember, when they joined the Big Ten, Maryland didn't have a field house to
Yeah.
practice football in until this
Right.
whole renovation of Cole Fieldhouse, which really makes me sad. I'm so glad I was up here in time to cover games in Cole Fieldhouse. The funny thing was about Cole Fieldhouse, you'd show up for a game, and you'd have to wear a short sleeve shirt that you could strip down to when the game started, because it was so warm in there, because there's so many bodies, the way the
Right.
heat stayed in there. And I was there at that Jason Williams, Shane Battier Duke game when they were down by 10 with a minute to play. I saw some incredible things, and I getting to see Juan Dixon. Oh,
Yeah.
what a competitor Juan Dixon was. And to see, you know, Steve Blake was my favorite player. Blake loved me because one time in the locker room, I told him, Steve, I love the second half of the games here because I get to watch the game over your shoulder and see what you're seeing and see the decisions you make. And he loved that. So I was a made man with Blake. In fact, I've got his number in my
Oh,
cell phone here.
nice.
And you
Well,
know, the other thing that happened when I got there was Ralph Friedgen. After 3 years, Ralph Friedgen came and saved football because it was just dying on the vine. Every year, 5 wins, never could get that 6th win. Would usually lose to UVA in the last game of the season. And
right.
Ralph came, and that first year it was just like, you know, it was a whole different atmosphere. The way Ralph came in and turned things around. And the thing I noticed first was that first game against North Carolina, when we walked into the press box, we had this buffet meal set out instead of the what they used to call Debbie dogs for Debbie Yao, had put out these hot dogs, and now suddenly we had real food. And I went, wow, this is great. And then I can't remember the running back, Parker, I think it was, for UNC, goes 80 yards on the first play of the game. We're like, oh, same old Maryland. But Maryland won the game. They
Right.
started out 7-0 that year, and then went on to the Orange Bowl and won the ACC. So
Yeah.
yeah, Ralph really changed things.
Yeah, and with Gary Williams and Juan Dixon and Steve Blake, they finally made it over the hump there in basketball and cut the nets down there on Championship Monday there in early 2000s.
Yeah, I got to cover those two teams, and again, the thing that stuck out to me was Juan Dixon's competitiveness. They blew a 20-some point lead to Duke in the Final Four that first year. Terrence Morris was the senior on that team. And those guys, I swear, those guys got back to campus and they were in the weight room the next day
Wow.
because the competitiveness on that team, led by Juan, but also Byron Mouton, Blake, Lonnie Baxter,
Yeah.
and they had such a rotation of good big guys. Taj Holden coming off the bench, a 6'10" guy that could play inside out. I'm leaving out some guys, but that was such a great team. And I tell you, the thing I remember most about that is I got about 12 years of those days. There's always a big press conference the day before a game or the day
Right.
before they go on the road for a game. And we get to go sit in the press room and talk to Gary. And if it's a big game, if it's, TV shows up and radio and everything. But if it wasn't, it was just a game like that. I hate saying that, but Gary would just be in there with the beat writers, like 3 or 4 of us, and I get to talk basketball with Gary Williams for like 20 minutes. You
Right.
know, just a couple of us that loved the game, and Gary understood like he does. We love
Right.
you like he does, and to get to talk to him and ask questions, anything. Oh my God, that's one of my favorite memories of my career as a sports writer.
Yeah, and your shirt. Before we go back to Radford, I mean, just the Nationals 2018 to host the All Star game, and then 2019 for the magical run and be World Series champs.
Well, that's the only team I got to get on the ground floor up here. Everybody else was already established. I was already established as a sports fan of other teams, and I really couldn't switch over very well to the Washington teams, especially if you keep up with the Wizards. And now them, trying to move the team out of D.C. to Virginia, which is just a mess. They just shouldn't even have stepped into that. And Washington now, apparently Maryland is trying to quash them moving back to D.C. They want to keep those tax revenues in Maryland, and it's a mess up here, Mark. But the Nats were new,
Yeah.
and I knew people my age who always told me about going to the Senators games when they were kids and how it hurt so bad when they lost their team. When that team came back, I think I cried that day because I was happy for those guys. And I got in, and they were terrible for years. And then to see them build up was just a lot of fun. You couldn't help but root for them.
Right. And so, with going back to Radford, I see that you were honored there in 2022 to go into their Hall of Fame.
That's right. That's because I know more people at Radford than anybody else, except the alumni director, Laura Turk, who, by the way, was a student worker for me.
Right.
So that's how things work for me. Yeah, Radford has been. I can't even begin to tell you how much Radford has given me, and I'm having fun now in my semi-retirement, living the semi-good life, giving back to the university in every way I can. I'm on the phone with prospective students. I'm on the phone with alumni trying to get them to the RU Gala
Right.
April 26th, which is going to be a great weekend if people can get back to Radford because there's a baseball series that weekend too. And the gala is just a great event. And one of the things I'm most proud of is the lineage of student workers at Radford and the Sports Information Office, which includes me,
Right.
now includes Marty Smith at
Yeah.
ESPN, who and John Steinberg at the Atlanta Hawks. We had a guy get to the number 2 job in the whole athletic department at the University of Kentucky, Rick Thompson, who's from
Wow.
Lexington, Virginia. I've had people intern for the Boston Celtics, for the St. Louis Cardinals, for the Washington Wizards, ESPN. Another kid, not Marty, another kid was taken in a national search to be the guy at ESPN. I've had another guy, Jimmy Bove, who was Student Worker of the Year, all the student workers at Radford University, and just the legacy of those kids and getting to work with them. And now I am so happy to say that I'm doing it again because I'm down there. I run a sports writers workshop for some kids down there that want to stay in communications, and we're reestablishing some of the old connections we had. And I got to say, working with those kids has been so much fun for me again. So
Right.
yeah, it's been great.
Yeah. So what the gala there on the 26th? What, that's Friday evening there at the Dedman Center.
Yes, yes, and home baseball that weekend, so Saturday game. So I'm hoping to get a lot of those SID kids back and show my old boss what he started by teaching me the ropes.
Right. Yeah. So,
All right, I
uh,
did all this and I wasn't even funny, so I feel bad. Yeah, let me tell you some of the things that got me in the paper over the years. I know we're going overtime here, but uh, once the Roanoke Times called me up and talked about we got flooded every year because our lower field hockey field was right by the New River, and we every
right,
year we'd get flooded. And somebody said, hey, what about that? And what do you guys do? I said, well, people down the river in Christiansburg have really nice Bermuda grass. I know that because the seeds get carried away every year. But I know this too, that if that's 100-year floodplain down there, like they told me, I've worked here 700 years. So yeah,
right.
and I always used to say that baseball, God love them, they want to get out there as soon as they can here in places like Radford. And people would ask me in the middle of basketball season when I was up to my eyeballs, men's and women's basketball, when
Right.
we opened baseball, and I tell them we opened with the annual postponement with VMI, probably on February 15th, which was generally true. I was like Nostradamus on that one. One time, Dante Washington scored six. Well, actually, that's not true. Twice, Dante Washington, our All-American soccer player who played on the national team, played in the Olympics, played for the Columbus Crew in the MLS. Dante Washington scored 6 goals in a game. The Washington Post called me up and asked me if we were nominating him for the Herman Award, the top award for men's soccer. And I went, oh, no, no, no. Dante had 6. That's a touchdown. I'm nominating him for the Heisman.
Well, yeah, yeah. And I had a junior high school classmate that went to Radford and played girls soccer. Holly Patterson.
I
Yeah,
remember that name. Yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah.
typed it in on a roster.
Right. Well, with talking to you, talking to Denny, I have reached out to Ron Peterson, and
Oh,
he's coming on later on in March. But there with the first days of Radford baseball, you talked about a guy from Campbell going 8 for 8 with 5 home runs.
Henry Rochelle. You don't forget a name like that. I used to get the NCAA record book every year. I think there were like 20 some offensive records in the book for Campbell, individual and team. And every year, the new NCAA record book would come in August, and I would get it and start looking through. And every year it would whittle down, and now they're all out. Other teams have had worse days than that. Of course, you got to remember that first Radford varsity baseball team, we had one scholarship player who was getting $100 for the whole year. His name was Ricky Saunders. He's in our Hall of Fame. He was our second baseman. He was a transfer from Longwood. He played. He's from Hopewell originally, and one of the greatest guys. He became a high school athletic director after a coaching career. Great guy, and I remember it started a legacy. Our first 3 second basemen at Radford were all Big South players. So I said, hey, second base at Radford's like tailback at USC, linebacker at Penn State. Hey, they're going to be all conference. That's what's going to happen. So yeah. And
Well,
Ron is another guy I should mention. He's had such a successful career, and now he's doing his own thing as an author of these murder books. The one on Gina Renee Hall was such a big deal in Radford, and again, the police never found a body, yet they were able to convict that guy, and all those guys for about 30 years just clammed up and never the Commonwealth's attorney, the prosecutors, the police, the state police, all the investigators, they never talked about it. Ron is such a good guy. He got them to talk and had a great book from it. I highly recommend for everybody. It's called Under the Trestle. Great book, particularly if you're familiar with the area down there. You just go, oh my gosh, I've driven down that road. I've seen that building. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
right. Yeah. Well, all right, Mike. Well, thanks for your time. And
Wow.
what if people want to get tickets there for April 26th? Just go to Radford Athletics website.
Yes. In fact, if you link into radfordathletics.com, it comes right up, and you just click on the logo for the gala, and it'll take you right to the ticket site. And again, Marty Smith is speaking, and if you're a sports fan, hearing Marty Smith speak in this kind of situation is just wonderful. Plus, there's food and drink, and I'm a big fan of all that too. So, yeah, it's a great time. A lot of stuff, a lot of good sports stuff, and trips and prizes will be auctioned silently and open auction. So it's. I was I went for the first time last year, and I had a blast. And
Uh,
I didn't ever consider myself a gala guy, but my wife enjoyed it too. And I've been telling everybody, you get to my age, you got to find stuff to take your wife to, and still get away with talking sports all night.
right. Yeah. And one last thing, with today being Thursday, aren't you regular guest there on Friday there, Rick
Oh
Watson?
yeah, Big Dog Sports. Yeah, Rick Watson, my pal. He's still trying to make me sound better on radio.
Okay.
I sound better tonight for some reason. I don't know
Right.
why. In the mornings, I seem kind of squeaky sometimes. I got to. I don't. I don't even have a face for radio, but
Right.
I got no voice for it. I always thought I would be better at it than I am. But yeah, Rick puts up with me, and usually I write some jokes for him in the morning, like I should have done for you. But I know my power has been off since 9 o'clock
Right.
last night, so
Yeah.
today we've been at DEF CON 3 all day.
Okay. Well, thanks for your time and sharing your story, and ties in there with the New River Valley, athletics. So thanks again, Mike.
Hey, Mark, thanks for the opportunity. I love it. I love talking to people down there in the Tidewater area. And I know you have a great reach and you have a great show, and I really appreciate the opportunity. So, like I say on the
Thanks.
radio show, Gooper says, hey.
Okay. All right. Well, talk to you later. And that's a wrap here for today's episode.